April 26, 2001. My name is Jerome Ferry. My cameraman is Alan Eggers. We are doing an oral interview with Major Robert S. Wray, retired, who was an early aviator in Cedar Rapids prior to and during World War II. Mr. Wray, tell us when you were born and where you were born.
I was born October 9th, 1916 in Milton, Iowa, which is down near Broomfield, south central.
Who were your folks?
My mother and father.
I'm asking these hard questions.
Yeah.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
I had a sister, but she died when she was about 4 years old.
Did you grow up on the farm or in Milton itself?
A little bit of both. Most of it on the farm, at my aunt's farm. Spent almost every summer there until I was about 16 or 17.
Did you enjoy growing up?
I sure did. Yeah, learned a lot there on the farm.
Did you have a creek that you messed
in.
around in, went fishing
sure
in?
Did. Creek was, you could jump across it. It caught a lot of big fish out of it.
Did you recall the Depression, or didn't it mean anything to you
very
at that
much so.
time?
Very much so. Yes, I recall. Ate a lot of potato soup and other things from potatoes. And I remember once we moved to Cedar Rapids, one summer was real hot, and all the fish of the city slough down here was coming back up the little creek that was feeding it. And as you go down there and the water was about 6 inches deep, you could throw these fish out of the shore. And I was a hero in the neighborhood for bringing all those fish for people to eat.
At what age did you become interested in flying? Was it when you were young?
Oh, yes. I'd say about 8 or 9 years old, maybe 7, something like that.
Was there any particular event that took place?
When Dan Hunter come to town, he landed out on the west side, about approximately where the present Cedar Rapids ballpark is. And I happened to be there and saw him land and so forth. And they come interested in airplanes.
And did you go out to the airport itself?
Well, sometime later, 2 or 3 years later, he had started the Hunter Field, which is located at Highway 30, and I don't know the exact location of it now, but southwest side of town. And I used to go out there all the time and hang around. And then I happened to start working by this time, I was out of high school, and I started college, and I got a summer job working for the Chris Hahn here in Cedar Rapids, who was the president of Cedar Rapids Engineering Company, and he was flying, and he used to take me for a ride. And so I went off to Saxon Field, which is north of town, and that's where I learned to fly. So,
how old were you then when you started taking your license?
I guess 16? I think so. 16, 17, something like that.
Who was your instructor at Saxon?
Ted Saxon.
Ted Saxon himself?
Yeah. I sold it, and I think it was in 4 or 5 hours. In those days, you had no restriction. Whenever you could fly, you could take the airplane.
No open cockpit?
No. This was a tailorcraft. And side by side, Yeah, I used to go down and pick up my wife-to-be when I had about 6 or 8 hours, farm and stuff.
Then once you got your license, did you
I never got my license.
You never got your license at Saxon?
That's correct.
You just took instructions?
I took flying lessons and did a lot of flying, went cross countries and everything. And by this time I read an article in one of the magazines about the West Point of the Air, the Army West Point of the Air, which is located in San Antonio, Texas. And I thought, man, it'd be great to fly one of those military airplanes, one of those big airplanes. And then the article stated about how perfect you had been health-wise and only the cream of the crop and all that propaganda and stuff like that. And I thought, well, shoot, I might as well apply for it. I at least will get a free ride down to Texas. I've never been out of Iowa. And if I wash out, I get a free ride home, and I will have flown military airplanes. It's worth the try. I won't make it because I'm not that good. So I lucked out and I made it. I went to flying school and graduated from Army Flying School in 1939.
Before we go into your military service, let's reminisce a little bit about Hunters Airport in Saxon Field. What do you remember? Anything in particular about Hunters Airport when you first went there? That was quite early in aviation.
Well, I don't know if you can see this picture or not, but this was at present day, this road goes on down to Kirkwood, and this used to be Highway 30 here. The main hangar is located here. I don't know if you can see that or not.
Yes, you can. Yep.
And I'm trying to think. I believe at that time they just had that runway. No, they had all these runways. Cedar Rapids had back up off here. Saxon Field was north of town, where the Collins radio plant now is, and the runways would drive directly across from the present day duck pond is out there. I'm sure you know where that is. But it just had one hangar, one little tiny office building, and the thing I remember about that was just a one strip, and it must have been about 3,000 feet long. And
what direction did it run?
East and west.
East and west. What would happen if the wind was blowing from a different direction? What would you
That's
do?
where you learn to fly and land across. You can do that. You can fly.
You went in the pond.
But Art Collins kept his airplane here. Sport, rural sportster.
Do you remember any of the people at Saxton? Any names?
No, Art Collins for one. Well, Jimmy Seeley, who is now dead, he belonged to an organization called, I gotta think a minute, K8. And I don't remember how they got the name, but that was the name of it. And there was, I think, 8 guys who belonged to this club, and I think they owned the airplane, and they shared expenses on it. When I was learning to fly out there, I was going with my girlfriend down in Mount Pleasant. And my mother worked downtown. Well, I went down to see her. My mother didn't know I was going to go down there, but I went down there. Well, while I was down there, I heard on the radio that they had a crash at Saxon Field and killed 2 people. Well, she knew I was going to go to the airport. So, man, was I in a hurry to get home to let her know it wasn't me. So, Keller, that owns the Keller office supply store. I forget what his first name is. He was involved in that group.
How about Hunter Airport? Do you recall any names there that you had associations with?
Not offhand.
Did you know Dan himself?
Oh yes, knew
Yeah.
Dan. Yeah. I didn't know. I don't remember. That's a long time ago.
There was a Dan Jr. also, his boy.
Well, he didn't show up until after the war. I never knew him.
You never knew him.
In fact, I think he was just a gleam in Pepe's eye.
So, you got your military training, and with flying colors, did you pass, or?
To get through, you had to be darn good. I'll tell you that. Out of my class, the numbers are approximate.
You can brag.
No. Out of my class that started there were over 300 students in the class, civilians. There were 100 graduates of West Point, of West Point. So they were already officers. We were cadets. That made a total of 400 people. Out of that 400, there was 120 that graduated from about 90 of them were civilians, and that's the rest of them military. And they didn't want pilots in those days. And when I finally graduated and become a great big second lieutenant in the Air Force, there were 2,000 Air Force officers, period. That was it. So you can imagine how fast the Air Force grew from there through the war.
You made the comment that they didn't want pilots. Was this prior to really having a Air Force?
Oh, they did.
There wasn't enough planes to go around.
That's right, not enough money to buy the gas. It was just the person is just kind of getting over with and so forth like this. And you made one mistake, you're out. I remember I sweat the fact that these are old tail dragger airplanes, which you don't see nowadays very much. But a lot of the guys would put it up on the nose, hit the brakes too hard, put it up on the nose. And there was one morning I was on the advanced stage. The instructor told us that the next guy that puts that airplane on the nose, he's out. So I got to get my airplane I'm on doing a cross country, and I get up there and I start taxiing out, and someone comes from me, and I put the brakes on. And the tail comes off the ground, and I'm sitting there balancing this thing. And I, come on, get that tail down. And my instructor sat over there watching me. Well, I come so close to the end of washing out. We made it.
In taking your training, what were they Were they trying to train you for any particular type of plane or operation? Just getting you
to fly an airplane.
To fly an airplane.
In those days, when you got to flying a military airplane or had taken your instruction, when you got to fly a new airplane, for instance, P-26, B-18, well, a small engine, any single engine airplane, they said, there's your airplane, go fly. You know how to fly. You don't need that. What's the big problem? Go fly. So they know. Now, when we got to Kelly Field, they had what they called an observation hangar, fighter pilot, or they call it pursuit and a bomber pilot. They had those three classifications. They didn't assign you that because you didn't get assigned to a bomber pilot, bomber hangar because you were going to fly bombers. That's the way you fell out alphabetically, you understand. So happened I got a bomber deal. I learned to fly multi engines, and that's when I graduated. But then the first day after graduation, I went up and flew a fighter. I was going to be an instructor at Kelly Field. It was my first assignment. And my wife and I made plans to get married. And within 1 week, I got ordered me to the Philippine Islands. So,
what year was this?
1939.
1939. This was 3 years before Pearl Harbor.
That's right.
Was there any feeling about things weren't right, that there could possibly be a war? Was there talk about this?
Yes and no. There was no conversation, but when normally at Randolph Field you have a lower class and an upper class, and then you go to Kelly Field and you become a Kelly Field Mister. Okay. Normally our class would be followed by another lower class, and we become an upperclassman. Well, our lower class were civilians who were going to go out and start these civilian training schools for the Army. They were there about 2 weeks, and the idea was to show them what military life was like and let them fly a military airplane and see how cadets, because they were going to be handling cadets, see what they were like. So our lower class was delayed for 2 weeks while we more or less got acquainted with these civilians. Now they went out in turn and started civilian schools. And that was the beginning of the cadre for the Army Air Force. That's where all the pilots come from.
I noticed that little statue there. Is that the
This?
dress?
Well, that was
uniform,
just going out of style. The pants were just going out of style when I got my second lieutenancy. The parachute, the helmet, everything else, that's the way you used to walk on, and they used to bump you in the back.
Did your chute? Did you sit on that?
Oh yeah, you sat on that. Presently,
When you sat down, that just more or less just fell in place.
it's just like a cushion, just fell in place.
Was it what you'd call comfortable, or
Yeah, very much
better?
so. Yeah. You I remember the order. You had the shoulder harness. You didn't fasten the leg straps until you got in the airplane, because as you start to get in, you fasten the seat. The only airplane I had a problem with was in flying the P-26. It has such a narrow cockpit. Come up, I had a door on the side. I couldn't get the chute in there. My rear end in there second time. So I opened the door, take the chute off, put it in there, then I climb in and get in, and then it's the crew chief had to help me get out of my parachute.
So you got shipped out to the Philippines. Did you? What was going on over there? Was there an air base there, or?
There were two air bases there, airfields. Nichols Field, which is right at the southern edge of Manila, and Clark Field, which is about 75 miles north and a little bit west of Manila. But Maria and I were assigned to Nichols Field.
What was your duties over there? Did you fly patrol, or a lot of sitting around?
You mean duties as far as flying airplanes are concerned? No, primarily just training. I requested that I go to an observation squadron for the simple reason that once you took a year's training in an observation squadron, you then got an observer's rating, which allowed you to continue flying as a observer on an airplane and still draw flying pay. Of course, that was an extra $100 a month. So that was a lot of money in 1939, 1940. And so I went to this observation squadron, and you had to have so many hours of photographic work, you had to have so many hours of directing artillery, so many hours of various items such as that. And so after the year, then I went into fighter pilots, but at that time I was a squadron commander and so forth. So.
How many types of planes were you qualified or familiar with flying
At that time?
at that time?
Well, of course, I'd gone through flying school. There were four different types of airplanes I flew in flying school. Then we got to the Philippines. The airplanes in the Philippines had been worn out in the United States, shipped to Hawaii. They wore them out there, and then it's shipped on the Philippines. We had airplanes that were turn of the century. You ever heard of a Keystone B-3?
I think I have, but I relate to it as a very old.
That was the airplane that bombed can't think of his name. The general that bombed the battle wagons and showed the army that you could blow up Navy boats and things like that. Mitchell, General Billy Mitchell. That's the airplane he used. And Marie has gone flying with me in it. We sat out in the open with a little short windshield here, engine on each side, and goggles. You take off at 80, climb at 80, cruise at 80, dive at 80, land at 80. Real fast airplane. And then it flew in the Mole engine Martin B-10s. Very much later, just before the war, Martin B-18s, or not Martin, Boeing B-18s. Then observation airplanes, O-46s, O-47s, O-19, thank you. P-26, P-12s, flew all those. Everything they had over there, I flew.
What was the hardest plane to fly as far as you were concerned?
None of them were. None of them were hard to fly as far as the one you had to be most careful with was the P-26. It was a man killer. It was a very short couple. The wheels were close together, short, and it was known as a man killer. In fact, if you see a picture of it, it's got a high headrest back here. So if you fly and you flip over it, it didn't kill you. But that was the...
So where were, rephrase this. So what were you doing when the Japanese attacked at Pearl Harbor? Were you still in the Philippines at that time?
I was in the Philippines. My wife, Marie, had been sent home. She'd been sent home in June of that year.
1941.
What?
1941.
1941. And
Evidently at that time they knew there was something probably...
we had been flying patrols up and down the coast of the Philippines and looking at looking at ships, try to identify things like this. We started this they went home in June, and that's about the time we started flying patrols.
You didn't happen to notice the Japanese fleet sailing towards Pearl Harbor, did you?
Oh no.
That was the wrong part of the country.
Yeah, wrong part of the world. Let's say.
In your patrolling, did you encounter any Japanese airplane?
No. We were a long ways from.
Long ways.
From what was then known as Formosa, which was north of us, quite a ways, and then from the way beyond that was Japan. So no, never saw any indication whatsoever.
Okay, great. So when did you, your group, find out? Was it shortly thereafter when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor? Or?
It was, well, of course, the war started for us in the Philippines on December 8th, not December 7th, because of the time change, international daylight. Yes, it was a Monday morning, and in the meantime, since our wives gone home, we had built machine gun nests on the field. I was a squadron commander, and I had, of course, the barracks, the buildings, and all that under my command. And we had alert practices where they'd shoot the cannon and everybody around there. Most of it was plane of war. Well, this Monday morning it was about, seemed like 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock, 6:30 maybe. The cannon went off, and I lived on the base at this time. And I thought, boy, what a heck of a time to hold an alert. So I finished dressing and started down the street, walking down to where my boats would be on alert, and down to my squadron. And here comes my first sergeant up, carrying my gas mask and helmet. I forget what else. And I says, "This is a heck of a time for alert." And he says, "Sir, it's no alert. It's a war. They bombed Japan, or they bombed Hawaii." And he got out the kid. So he told me what was going on. Well, we didn't quite get back to the squadron before here come a runner from headquarters, asked me to report to the colonel of the field. So I do about face, go back up to the colonel, and he said I'm to report to Air Force headquarters, which is over at Nielsen Field. And the colonel would relieve me of all my commands there at the field, and I'm to be attached to Air Force headquarters operations. So I go over there, and they want somebody to go up and take pictures of Formosa, which is now Taiwan. And I'm supposed to take my photographic equipment, several different aerial cameras, and a couple of photographers, and go to Clark Field and pick up a B-17 and go to Formosa. Okay. So we load up the General's airplane, which is a Grumman 089 amphibian. Put all my cameras stuff in there and take my men. We go to Clark Field. Well, we have to circle Clark a couple times while the P-40s are taking off. The fighters are taking off. excuse me. And you must remember, in those days, communication is not like it is today. The radio equipment, you were lucky if you could talk to the guy flying next to you. And if you were real, real lucky, you could talk to the control tower. Most of those light signals like this. Anyway, I finally landed and taxied over and parked in front of the operations building. And nobody there. I said, where's operations? Oh, back over so-and-so. So I started walking over there. And somebody said, oh, isn't that a beautiful sight? I look up, and there's the most beautiful sight of bombers. They're beautiful V formation come up. That must be the Navy. And then you could hear the bombs coming down. I don't know if you've ever heard coal going down a chute into a basement of buildings like it, but it's a rumble. And that's the way those bombs sound coming down. Apparently the rumble comes from coming out of the bomb base. That was the beginning of the war, as far as we were concerned.
Was this November 8th?
December.
December 8th.
December 8th.
So they started bombing the Philippines shortly after Pearl Harbor.
That's right. Yeah. Well, the reason they didn't bomb Philippines at the same time they bombed Hawaii was because there was fog for most of them. They couldn't get off the ground. We found out later. Otherwise, they'd been over us at the same time they'd been over Hawaii. But this was later in the day after the fog cleared up, and then they took off and come down. And,
so what were they bombing your airfield?
Yes, Clark Field.
Clark Field.
Trying to get rid of all the bombers. They bombed, come in and hit us, and did a good job. They're excellent. Walked right down the flight line. Got my airplane. The bombers. In fact, they wiped out most of the B-70s at the time. I just got up out of this garbage pit I jumped into, and here comes the fighters. They strafed the field for about an hour. And what bombs hadn't got, they got with their guns. A couple of fighters got up, but they were soon shot down. The Philippine Air Force was destroyed at that time. Strictly, I won't say anybody's fault, might have been, might not. But these bombers had taken off when we first found out about 7 o'clock in the morning. And they had dispersed, going out and just flew around all the islands because they were expecting the Japs to come in, which would be logical. They wouldn't bomb it. They didn't know anything about the fog. They didn't let them. Well, they soon began to run all low on fuel. So they come back into Nichols Field. Someone went down to Del Monte, which is in the Southern Islands. The rest of them come in, landed back at Clark to take on fuel. Well, you know what time that was. Just as the Japs got there. They had landed, went over and parked in their ramparts, and here comes the Japs. So that's why they destroyed all the bombers. The only ones that got away actually were there were a couple that survived there at Clark Field, but the rest of them survived went down to Del Monte, sugar, or a pineapple plantation in Del Monte.
So what happened to your base then? What was your...
Well, this was Clark Field, of course, and I had to get my crew, myself, back down to Nichols Field. So we found a command car that had been all shot up and had a body in it. We pulled the body out, laid it down, got in the car and drove back down to Nichols Field. And I was the first one to make a verbal report. They knew that the field had been attacked, but all communication had been cut off and blown up. So I made my report to operations and to the general and General Claggett. And rigging and stuff I like talking about. But anyway, I stayed on there as assistant operations officer for the 5th Air, which was going to be the 5th Air Force. At that time it was just Far Eastern Air Force Command, is what it was. And my command officer was I think the great-grandson, wasn't it, of Horace Greeley. Go West, young man, go West. Horace Greeley, very good friend. We lived, same barracks, or same quarters. from there, we tried to run a few interceptor flights with a few fighters. Wasn't too successful, although out of it we got an ace by the name of Buzz Wagner. And he finally had to be sent back to the States after about a week or so because he got a bullet through the windshield and got glass in his eyes. Lost a lot of pilots. And Christmas Day we retreated back into Bataan. And I lost my command by this time. I lost my command when I went into operations, but now operations, there was nothing to operate because there were no airplanes. And sat back there in Bataan for about a week or so like this. And they finally got organized enough where there were 2 fields, and building a 3rd one, where they brought the rest of the fighters in. And the general wanted somebody with squadron experience to take over the fighters. So I was the unlucky one that got picked to do it. I went up to a place called Orani, and I commanded all the fighters that were left in the Philippines, which I think were 12 or 14. And was there, I think, 2 weeks trying to run patrols with pilots who had gotten the Philippines, I think 3 weeks before the war started. We had no maps of the Philippines. They had never been over the part of the Philippines. So we were trying to tell them, well, now follow this mountain range up to hit this body of water in Toronto.
Everything was jungle, wasn't it? Pretty much so.
And rice paddies. Yeah. So, and we finally had to order a retreat out of that field. We took off one end of the field while the Japs were coming in the other end of the field. And my squadron went on beach defense, and we had a big fight there. And finally surrendered, made the death march, 3.5 years prison.
When did they? How did they get? Did they come in ships when they invaded the Philippines, or how did that many troops get onto the Japanese get onto the Philippines?
They had big convoys, and they landed in one.
Did anybody know they were coming?
Well,
They
sure.
could see the convoys coming.
We knew they were coming from somewhere else, and they had bombed us, and we knew they were going to come in. And we had reports, and our reconnaissance flights reported them up at a Perry and a Linn Gulf, and then landing off to the southeast of Manila. And of course, we knew when they landed and so forth. Yes.
And you knew there was no.
No, we were still fighting. Well, you're getting involved in a lot of history now. You have to go back to the original plans for the Philippines. They had what they called the Orange Plan. Now, this Orange Plan, and this was devised back in the 20s, I guess, or very early 30s. The Orange Plan said what we'll do is take all our troops and take them back into Bataan, and we'll defend Bataan because we got Corregidor right next to it with its great big guns, and we'll stock this peninsula of Bataan with supplies, and that's where we'll defend the Philippines between them and Corregidor, because the guns of Corregidor can protect Bataan. Well, General MacArthur come into command. I don't know how much you read about General MacArthur. I will say this about him. If I had to fight another war, I'd like for him to be a commanding officer, but at the same token, he had an egotism that he couldn't put down. And of course, had been in the Philippines a number of years, and he told the Philippine people, we will defend the Philippine Islands, we will stop them at the beaches. So they abandoned the Orange Plan and went to beach defense, supposedly. This occurred about 6 months to a year before the actual war started. Well, all the projects in Bataan stopped. The buildings they were building back in there were never filled with food, ammunition, anything like this. Everything was beach defense. Well, they found out they can't defend the beaches, and so here's all these troops finally end up back there in Bataan, and we have no supplies. So it didn't take us very long to run out of medicine or run out of food. As I remember correctly, after we had to retreat out of our field, I think we had 6 airplanes left when we finally had to leave Wray and go back down in a field called Bataan Field. And there the general took over command of that field, and he took some officers, pilots from each squadron to fly these 6 airplanes. And we used to say, keep it flying. You had a statement here in the United States, keep them flying. We had to keep it flying. Excuse me. And my squadron went on beach defense, clear over on the side of Bataan. Excuse me. So that's where we had our little battles and things like that.
You were captured at this time?
No, we didn't capture until April the 9th, 8th, April the 9th.
And at that time, how many airmen were there that was captured?
You mean in my squadron?
Yes. Or altogether, approximately, you suppose?
I have no idea how many. Of course, the infantry is back in there, of course, artillery, quartermaster corps. There's all of these thousands of people back in Bataan. From what I've read, the figures go from 60,000 to 80,000 people were back in there trying to feed them. My own squadron, as my memory serves me correctly, I had 222 enlisted men and 23 officers. We're on beach defense. And when we left the field, went to beach defense, we went down to 2 meals a day. I'm sorry, we had gone to 2 meals a day when I was up at the airfield. We went on beach defense, we went on 1 meal a day.
Who gave the order that we're going to surrender, or how did that come about? I mean,
one morning the phone rang, says we have surrendered.
where did that come down from? Some place there in the Philippines, or?
Right on Bataan itself, and General King was my command, and they said they're surrendering. I don't know, he said this morning or the time or something like that, you surrender, and that was...
Did they give you any instructions as to what your behavior would be or should be?
None whatsoever.
Lay down your arms and...
Destroy as much equipment as you can, and that's about all.
Before they got there.
I don't even remember if they told us that. We were trying to be smart enough to do that.
So they just rounded you up.
Well, we were down on beach defense. The first thing, of course, the password. Now you have to remember, these troops have been on 1 meal a day for approximately a month. Most of them had malaria, including myself. Left the beach and went back up to this main road, which was about a mile back up. Well, this is the road that went around Bataan. We went back up there and sat and waited for the Japanese to come. Now, during this time, I had inspected the troops and told them to throw away any Japanese souvenir that they had. Best thing I ever done. Went up there, and I think about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, finally, here comes a Jap. I've got all my troops back in the jungle against him, and I'm out to myself. Anyway, we surrendered to them, and the officers got in 2 or 3 cars that we had there, and they told us to go back down the road. And I assumed had trucks for all the men for them to ride in too. So we all just go down the road, and we go about 2 or 3 miles, something like this, and we're stopped by other Japanese. They start searching us, and I think the first thing I lost was my watch, fountain pens, anything you had on you, they wanted, they took. And they started killing anybody that found the souvenir on, like Japanese money. And skipping a lot of details, we finally got down to a place called Wray, and that's where they were gathering us all together and taking all the equipment and stuff like that down there. And that's where we spent the first night sleeping on the ground.
Could you understand them?
There was enough of them that could speak enough English. And you can understand a lot of things if you got a bayonet in your stomach.
Yeah.
And a guy like Wray anxious to push it on the rest of the way. And they love to use a bayonet. Oh. Yeah, you learn real fast. You get the idea what they're talking about.
So you mentioned that's where you spent the first night. I imagine it was on the ground.
Oh, no, just, and remember the next morning there's a little tiny creek going through there. And we found a 5-gallon gasoline can, washed it out, and we had little packets of coffee. And collected enough coffee from all the guys in the squadron, fill this 5-gallon can full of water and pour all this coffee in and build a fire in it. So we're going to have we hadn't had anything to eat for 2 days now, starting the second day. And we just come to a boil. Just come to a boil. And we're ready to, guys, come on in. The Japs said, line up. And we walked off, left that coffee there. I thought that's what it is. And that was the beginning of the death march for us. So, and it lasted 7 days for me. And
how many miles?
well, I don't forget, we've already covered about 20 miles walking down here. The final death march itself actually was about 75 miles. And then we rode a train from San Fernando to Capas. And then we had another 7 or 8 or 9 miles to march.
Did they feed you anything at all?
I say, depending on what group you're in. Now, there were people that were in the tent that rode on the cars. There were some people that walked part way and rode part way. Where were you? At what time? What group were you with? For the first, well, as we left our starting point there, they just more or less pushed us down the road. Going down the road. Because coming down the right-hand side of the road was Japanese troops. They get set up to fire on Regular. My second night was, let's see, it's up here just, as you come out of Mary Villas, you're coming up over the leg of a mountain. See, this is a mountain right here. And you're walking around this mountain is what you're doing. Well, of course, there's humps or legs, shall we say, you come off the mountain, you have to go up over these things. We got this zigzaggy road back over and got in the edge of the jungle and it's dark. Sit down, this is where you spend the night. And so we just backed off into the jungle. Now we're just being pushed along, no guards particularly so. And we spent the night there. During the night, I felt a snake crawling up across my legs. And there are a lot of poisonous snakes back in there. And I could feel that thing, and I yelled, snake, reached down, threw it like that. Went right back to sleep. Next morning, they put us back on the road again. And now by this time, we had reached where Bataan Field was. And they had set up their big artillery pieces to fire over on Craigor. So they put us around their guns so that Craigor would counter-fire, ever killing us. Well, we soon, that didn't last very long. We rioted out of there and back down to the road. And on up. Oh, a few miles wide. They had guards signed on us. Now in the meantime, the Japs were still coming down the road. And every time a truck would go by or something like this, why, the Jap would come out with a rifle butt and hit one of us. Or,
just for meanness.
oh yeah, that's something to do. Hey, that's great sport. And some of them are marching. And killed.
Where were they trying to herd you to? To a camp? Confinement?
Just to get us out of Bataan so we wouldn't be in their way while they were going to fight Trade. They were trying to get us up to a town called San Fernando. There are a lot of San Fernandos in the Philippines. But to get up there, and there they would load us on boxcars, small boxcars. Most of them were wood-sided, but they were very tight wood-sided. And they packed us in there where you could lift your feet off the ground, off the floor. You wouldn't fall down. You were so tight packed in there. I remember this is the tropics and no water. And we had guys, and this trip was about, maybe 30, 40 miles in the boxcar. It took all one day. We left a lot of guys dead in there, just in the heat, what they'd been through and so forth. And then we got off that thing, and I had another 7 or 8 miles to march to Camp O'Donnell, which was one of the worst camps in the Philippines. There were 500 Filipinos dying a day there, and my memory serves me correct, 50 Americans dying a day. Well, now you can very quickly mathematically figure out exactly when you're going to die, and I mean you figure about 8.5 days. I'm dead. I'm one of those numbers. The guy, the pallbearers today with the patients, where the guys being carried out tomorrow, and taking them out over the little rise here, throwing dirt in our face. But that death line, the bodies being carried out, went on 24 hours a day. There are a lot of pictures of Filipinos carrying one on each end of a bamboo pole with a blanket in between, and there's a body in there, and the caption on it is something about the death march. Well, it's not the death march at all. There was no such help on the death march. These were bodies being taken out to be buried like that. O'Donnell. Just a steady line. 500 a day, that takes a long while to do that. And the weakest of guys were. Well, again, you could, and they had the camp divided. White people on this side, Filipinos on this side. Didn't take very long mathematically to figure out when you were going to die. So I said, I got to get out of here. And I had malaria real bad. And they wanted a work detail. They had a couple other work details. So I volunteered for this work detail, and it turned out to be a bridge building detail. So there were, I don't remember now how many it was, 50, 100 of us. 4 or 5 trucks taken out of camp. Now, in this camp, we had been fed 1 rice ball a day, and somebody that had 1 spigot in camp where thousands of people, and you stood in this water line 24 hours a day. I say you had to get 4 or 5 of you together, and you take turns standing in the water line so you could work up towards the phone. Because by the time you got water, you had to go back in line again because you got water. And so I got away from that, but we went out on this work detail where we had to rebuild a bridge that was going up, and I was on that for let's see, about 5 months, I guess it was. And then I went in the camp, Combatant 1. And there I was there about 2 months, and the malaria was getting, I could almost have, if you had a clock, watch it, you could set the time to time, you get there every day, day in and day out. Excuse me. And I felt I had to get out of there or I was going to die right there, because we had people dying again, about 50 a day, all American, no Filipinos in this camp. And detail come up to go to Japan. I volunteered for it and ended up getting on a boat and spent almost 30 days, believe it, going from the Philippines to Japan. Stopped at Formosa. We were not attacked at any time, although we had 2 or 3 warnings. We were cramped in this bottom of this boat so much. That 3 people had to rotate.
You were on board ship.
Okay, you had to have 3 of us in the whole of the ship. We were on the bottom of the. You could feel the water, or you could feel the cold of the water. One would stand up, one could sit, and one could lie. 24 hours a day. You rotated this. So we went to Japan. For toilet facilities, you had what they call honey buckets. I think you know what I mean, just a bucket, and that's where you went, and they roped it up to the surface. And I'm exaggerating a little bit, but they sent our rice back done in the same bucket. They did have some toilets on the edge of the boat. You'd hang out over the water, but you had to be very lucky to get up there and get out on that. So, anyway, we had our little trip up to Japan.
Did they treat you with any civility at all? Isn't there a code prisoners are supposed to be treated in such a manner? That wasn't so, as far as the Japanese were concerned.
As far as Japanese concerned. See, to be a Japanese prisoner is considered a disgrace, and that's why all other prisoners were treated. And in fact, they kept telling us, well, you are not prisoners of war, or you are, I forget what word they use, but they didn't treat us as prisoners of war. They declared us as prisoners of war for, I think, 2 years, something like that.
When you were assigned to the bridge detail, were you asked, or were you told, or did you volunteer, or?
I volunteered to go in that detail.
Did they treat you any differently or feed you any better because you did?
Yes, they did. We had a good officer in charge, a Japanese officer, that fed the troops real well, and he told us about another work detail that they weren't doing good work and they had to take out a guy and shoot him and stuff like this. But we were fortunate. We had a good work detail, and they built this bridge, and the Japanese were pleased with it. But we still, we could stand all day with a pick and make a hole 6 inches deep and work at that thing. So, oh man, I tell you, we're really working. They thought we were working like mad when we were doing anything. But, so I was a friend of mine, a friend of ours here in town was on that same detail with me. We listened back.
So at the end of your boat trip, where were they sending you at that time?
I went to Osaka, Japan. Yumita Bunsho, Osaka, Japan. And it was a L-shaped building, 2-story, with the, you might say the other half of the L, or the U, was the quarters for the Japanese. And there, you had to work, whether you want to or not. And
What type of work?
well, we worked as coolies. We unloaded barges onto the dock. We loaded on dock to barges, boxcars to the dock. We unloaded coal, telephone poles, anything come through. We loaded and unloaded them.
Did you still have malaria at this time?
Yes, I did.
Did they try to give you anything to treat it?
No.
You lived with it, or you died? One of the other.
That's right, exactly right. And we lost thousands of people because of malaria.
Is this malaria? This is something that you pick up in a jungle type environment or
What is mosquitoes?
lack of food or?
No, this is strictly my mosquitoes. Panama Canal. That's what killed so many of the people down there. It was malaria. Everybody got the Panama Canal. Mosquito bites. I still have when I got home. She went through several episodes with me.
So how long were you a prisoner of war?
3.5 years.
3.5 years. And at what time did you get turned loose? Was that right after they surrendered, or?
I'd say about 2 weeks, about a week after the war was over, we found out. No, we found out 2 days after the war was over. I'm sorry, let's back up here a little bit. We found out the day the war was over, that was over. 2 days later, a week later, rescue party come in to get us at camp in Japan. And then 2 days later, we left camp and went down to Tokyo to get on the boat to back home.
Did they, once the Japanese, did they admit, the people that were guarding you, did they admit that they had surrendered, or were they still treating you like animals?
We felt that we could hear our bombers coming over. And in fact, one night they used our camp, apparently. We didn't know it, and I don't think they did either. But as a rendezvous point to go in and bomb this town of Fukuoka, which we were near. And we felt that what the Japs were going to do was kill us all before they would surrender. So we were prepared to riot, and we were going to also, another big factor was, our health would go by the season. It'd be pretty good up here in the summertime. Wintertime we'd go down here. In summertime we'd come back up here. So this way we've been going. We were getting right down here, and we felt, now we're in the cold. We're up in the mountains. Japanese Alps is what they call them. And it's cold enough to freeze up there. And snow. In fact, we were in a Japanese alpine training camp is where we were. And we felt that we could not survive the winter. Food-wise, heat-wise, everything.
Did you have any clothes?
Yeah, about as heavy as her pants. About as heavy as your pants. That's total. That's it. You got it. No matter how cold it got outside. That was it.
Did you hear about the atomic bomb?
No, we did not hear about the atomic bomb. Didn't know about it until, if I remember correctly, we were on the boat going down to the Philippines.
So when our troops come in, did they more or less capture the Japanese, or did the Japanese run off?
The Japanese were surrendered like showmen, shall I say. They were the emperor said, the war is over, the war is over. And that's, how are you?
They accepted it.
Good day, thank you. What can we do for you? You just, very much of a gentleman. Very accepted it, and that's it, period.
So
no question in their mind.
When you were finally released, then what happened to you? How long was it before you got back to the United States?
Well, we went from Tokyo down to the Philippines on a Navy boat, and that took, I don't know, a week or something like this. And then I was there in the Philippines at a recovery camp, I think for another week or 2 weeks. Now, I could have flown home. The Air Force guys could have flown home if they wanted to. But I had beriberi real bad. I don't know if you know what beriberi is.
Only reading about it from the way back, and the sailors had it on board ship from lack of
vitamins.
Vitamins.
Yeah, and scurvy and stuff. Scurvy. Most people think of scurvy.
What was beriberi? What was the symptoms?
Beriberi is a lack again of proper food and things like this. But beriberi is in two forms: dry or a wet. And the wet, your body tissue break down in water. Water would collect under your skin and so forth. And you start out, you can see it on your ankles. Your ankles would swell up to get to be the size of your leg up here. And you just continue on up. Now this takes time. But finally, it comes on up to here and you drown to death. You just drown. Your lungs has no room to expand. You drown. Great. I've seen guys die of that. You couldn't get enough people around a door to carry them. They were so heavy, had so much water in them. That's called beriberi. My face, my ankles would swell up. But I've been around. And I didn't want to come home with her sick.
How many survived that in Japan when they surrendered? How many would you guess were left there at the camp in Japan?
In all the camps in Japan?
Well, yeah, both. You know, do you have any idea?
In your camp particularly?
Yeah.
I really don't know. Do you remember any of the quotes?
Well,
I
what I do remember is that on the death march there were about 60 or 80, 10,000 survived. 60 or 80.
Out of my squadron.
Oh, you told me, not very many.
Out of my squadron that I was commanding,
In a single digit.
there were 2 officers out of 23, myself and one other.
I think that's it.
And then, this is personnel. I think there were 20, in the 20s out of 222.
So, you went into service prior to World War II. You got transferred to the Philippines. War broke out. You were captured shortly after the war broke out, and you spent your entire stint in concentration camp in Japan.
For all practical purposes.
For all practical purposes.
Yeah.
When did you obtain the rank of major?
I was a captain when I went into prison camp. I'd been promoted to captain when we were on Bataan. And they give everybody one promotion when they recovered you and come back. Now it's been interesting that in all the wars since, or little fights as they call them, Korea, Vietnam, so forth. Chile. They promote officers as their classmates or time are promoted. So some guys could go in as a captain and come out as a colonel if he was in that long and so on. You notice all these prisoners that were spent 5, 6, 7 years in Vietnam are all colonels. You notice that? They were promoted. We were not. My group that was.
It's just like you were on leave.
Yeah. So I was promoted the day we recovered. The major. But that's it.
Then when you come back to the United States, where did you you and your wife get together? On the West Coast, or?
Yeah. At where was it? Near Madigan General Hospital. At Tacoma, Washington.
Take it safe on your okay. Robert, you would like to introduce your wife?
My sweetheart, huh?
I'm Wray.
Hi.
I know you've been sitting here listening to all of this, and it hasn't been any easier on you than it has been on your husband. But now that he is on his way back home, where did you finally rejoin each other?
At Madigan General Hospital in Tacoma, Washington. I left our little boy at home who was 4.5 years old. He had never seen him, but he knew he was born. And I went by train without any reservations or anything. And everybody was very nice, and they found a seat for me. And I met him in Tacoma.
Did anybody forewarn you as to what to expect as far as what he was going to probably look like?
There'd been a lot of articles in the paper about them, but I really didn't realize what he would look like. I knew he would be very thin. He weighed 125 pounds when I met him, but I didn't realize he'd be that thin.
How long were you in the hospital? How long did you have to stay in the hospital?
6 months.
6 months. And that was trying to get your body built up, get rid of your malaria, get rid of your very.
Yeah, no, this wasn't American General. I was on my hospital plane, trained from American General down to Denver, Colorado, Fitzsimmons General Hospital, where I was for 6 months. I was there, American General, for about 2 weeks, something like that.
Did you stay there that full time that he was in the hospital, or did you have to go back home?
I stayed when he was at Madigan, but when he was sent to Denver, I went back home.
And then you come back out and live with me.
And then I came back out with our boy and stayed at a little tiny apartment while he was at Fitzsimmons.
Have you ever been bothered with malaria throughout your life since then?
Sure I have been. She can tell you some.
Like what effects would it have had later in life?
I had some real good malaria attacks. I started out by chilling, I guess I would be. I'd just get cold. And go to bed. And you couldn't get me warm. I don't care what you do. Pile blankets on me. I'd just shake. And then I started getting hot. And nothing you could do would cool me down. And I perspired so much, I wasn't smart enough to get a rubber blanket underneath me. I swept through all the blankets down to into the mattress. And you can tell them what you usually had to do for me.
Well, then I'd have to change all the bedding, put on clean bedding, and the whole cycle would start all over again. And he chattered so that I put a comb between his teeth.
Wrapped in a handkerchief.
And
So it didn't chip your teeth.
true. And these cycles would last 2 or 3 days sometimes.
I looked like death walked over.
Oh, he did. When he recovered, he looked like death warmed over. Gaunt and pale.
But in 30 minutes I could be up and out and come down here and say, well, what do you got to eat?
I didn't know what malaria was all about. And it kind of scared me. And one time, he took quinine for it. And one time, he was so bad, I said, how many quinine pills should I give you?
These were 5-grain pills.
And before I knew what was happening, he took my whole handful and plopped them down. I thought, oh my goodness. And he was well the next day.
Was right.
But I remember going to the local doctor here, telling him I need some quinine pills, and what for malaria. They didn't know anything about malaria. I said, doctor, I want some 5-grain tablets. I'll eat this many. Get a big jar full of them, eat them like peanuts. Finally, you don't know how many years. In fact, we think every once in a while it kind of flares up when I get one of these.
I think it does. You never get it out of your system.
Yeah, I can't donate blood. I can't do anything like that.
I know this has been a very trying experience for both of you, but I am sure that your family someday will appreciate what their folks went through for them. The History Center would like to thank you very much, and we will come back and talk to you at a later date about your happier times in life in working for the halls and with the halls. But until that time, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
This is part 2 of an interview with Bob and Marie Wray. Bob, when you finally got released from the concentration camp and you returned to the United States, where did you come back to?
Come back into Tacoma, Washington.
Is that a military hospital?
Yes, to Madigan General Hospital at Tacoma, Washington.
I can imagine you were in pretty bad physically health at that time when you come back to.
Yes, I went by hospital train from after being Madigan. 2 weeks, I think it was. I went by hospital train from there down to Denver, Colorado, to Fitzsimmons General Hospital, where I remained for 6 months.
Okay. And Marie, when did you two become united? How soon after he returned to the States?
I think he'd been there a day and a night, and I took a train out to meet him, and he did not meet me at the station, so I knew the hotel where he was staying, and I went there, and I was so nervous I could not unlock the door. I was given a key, and I asked the cleaning lady who was there in the hall to unlock the door. And she did, and I walked in, and there was this man whose face was round like a pumpkin, and he had a mustache, and he was bald, and he was naked from the waist up. And I thought, who is he? I must have the wrong room. So he, in the meantime, wondered who this lady was. And then we finally realized who each other was.
Did anybody prepare you as to what to expect, possibly expect, as far as what he, how he had changed, or was it kind of like walking in on a total stranger?
Nobody told me. It was like walking in on a total stranger. Not at all what I expected.
Did you have anything in common at that time? I mean, he didn't recognize you, you didn't recognize him.
Our voices. And we were not like we used to be. We were both strangers.
Did you find you had anything in common at that time to talk about?
No, not really. We spent the entire night. He was talking about the war and his experiences. And I think he needed to talk, and I needed to listen, and I did. But
how long did you stay there then?
I stayed there until he left to go to Denver, to Fitzsimmons Hospital. I can remember I was looking forward to us being together. And I was isolated at home during the war, and I was looking forward to us doing things. And I can remember he was going to take me out to a real nice dinner. So we went to a very nice place and ordered a real nice dinner. Soup, salad, I think it was steak, and dessert. And when it was placed in front of us, he got up and walked out. He couldn't eat it. It was just too much for him. So I was rather disappointed in that. And that happened more than once.
I can imagine.
Because his stomach, it was hard for him to adjust to the rich food and to eat a complete meal.
Was it hard to become reacquainted, or to, what should I say, fall in love again, or?
We were both very shy. But as time went on, we were very much in love with each other. By the time he left for Denver, I didn't want to leave him. I hated to see him go. And I wished that I could have gone on the train with him. But we left hoping that when he got settled in Denver, I could come back.
Unless you two have any more things you would like to mention here, I would like to move on to a happier time in your life. Was there anything else that you wanted to record for posterity as far as your experiences or his experiences?
We had changed a lot, and that my personality and his personality were different. I can remember going to a movie together with him, and he said to me, "Are they showing things like that?" I mean, they were so farce to him. He had been so close to reality. So it took him a while to get used to our movies. And it took him a while to get used to our son. He was used to having me to himself. And it was hard for him to stand in line for a meal or for a ticket or for a movie or some event. And because he had stood in line so long in prison camp for water. And the first year he was home, he was free. He could go anywhere he wanted to. So he flew all over the United States in the AT-6. And I stayed home because I couldn't keep up with him. And I kind of resented that. But it was now I understand, but at that time I did not. And I was...
Why he didn't want to be with you all the time?
Why he just didn't want to stay in one place all the time. It wasn't that he didn't want to be with me, he just wanted to go. And if I wasn't able to go, he would go anyway. And as I look back on it, he needed to do that. He had been told what to do, and nobody was going to tell him what to do. No one was going to tell him to stay put. And so he had a year of freedom. And then he came back and decided that he needed to get a job.
Okay, Bob, so now that you're back in the civilized world and back home, what did you think you wanted to do?
Well, let's back up just a little. While I was in the hospital in Fitzsimmons in Denver, they told me they were going to retire me. And I said, "You can't do this." You know, this was 3 colonels, and I'm just a major. I said, "You can't do this. My friends are running the Air Force." And they were, because my roommate was a general, and all my classmates were at least colonels. I got locked out of the meeting. And they were very smart, very good officers. They let me cool off for a couple of days and then come back, go over to my room in the hospital, and said, "Now let's look at this smartly." He said, "You can retire now on as much money as the average person worked all his life on with retirement pay. And you know very well that when the war is finally settled down, the aftermath of it, they're going to start getting rid of people out of the Air Force. And you're going to be one of the first ones because of your disability." And that started to make sense to me. So I said, okay. But I say that because that's what I wanted to fly so badly. So when I got back home and I finally settled down, get a job, I was offered an opportunity to take a cross country for the 100 Flying Service here in Cedar Rapids. And it so happened there was a fellow in town by the name of Babe Anderson that was well known locally. And he had a brother out in Klamath Falls, Oregon that was dying, and he wanted to get out and see him before he died. So Hunter asked if I would fly Babe out to Klamath Falls, Oregon. Sure. Let me do it. Well, we got there an hour after Babe's brother died, and we come on back. And as a result, I made a couple trips for Hunter charter. In those days, the rules and regulations weren't nearly as stiff as they are now. As a result of those trips, I got to be known locally as an experienced pilot, and I went to work for the Oval Flight Show Manufacturing Company. Flew their airplane for 2 years. And then they got to the place where they could not afford an airplane, and they sold it. And I took a 6 months leave, you might say. And then Fritz Hahn, who was another industrialist here in Cedar Rapids, who was a friend of mine, I had worked for him on the airport, told me that Howard Hall was looking for a pilot, and that the pilot who had been flying the airplane from Hunters had scared Mr. Hall and some of these people, and he wanted a full-time pilot all his own. So I went over to talk to Mr. Hall and ended up working for him.
Did he check out your credentials as to how good of a pilot you may be?
Well, he was on the board of directors for Little Plant Show Company, and so he knew me through Little Plant Show Company. And I guess he had talked to Chris Hahn about me, and Chris knew me from flying experience because he had flown with me a lot. I had bought this AT-6, and Chris flew with me on AT-6. So anyway, Chris recommended me to him, and when I interviewed with Mr. Hall, I went in and I told him that what I would like to do was for him to give me an office job, and I would give him a good pilot. And he seemed to like that attitude, so he hired me on that basis. And I started the most interesting, the most fascinating career I could ever want. So both me and I enjoyed that tremendously.
What was some of the longest flights you flew for Iowa Man?
Well, let's see, I've been in every state in the United States except Maine. So, and around the Florida, got to be after a while, every day. I won't say an everyday affair because it wasn't, but went down several times a year, something, because Mr. Hall had a summer or a winter home down there, 2 locations in Miami itself, and then down in the Keys. And a long time leading up to it, but Mr. Hall would call me in the office and sit and talk with me. And one day he says, "You know, you can do something for me. Get Mrs. Hall to like to fly, because she did not like to fly. She was scared of flying." I said, "We can work on that." So told Marie about this, and every December the 14th, the Halls would take off to go to their home in Florida. That was Mrs. Hall's birthday. So this one year, we decided, Mr. Hall taught Mrs. Hall, and the flying down to Atlanta, Georgia, wasn't it?
Yes.
And Marie would go along, and this way Marie could explain to Mrs. Hall what the noises were in the airplane and why it was turning and things like this. So it'd make her try to feel more comfortable. And we had a very eventful trip to Atlanta. Mrs. Hall sat there with her head down, gripping her arms in the chair with her head down, just looking at the floor all the time. And you were telling her about the noise of the landing gear coming up and the usual noises you should get in an airplane.
How old were you at this time, Bob?
30?
I think so, yes.
How old were you, Marie?
Same age.
Did you feel after a while that you were becoming good friends of the Halls? Not only were you his employee, but you were becoming a very good friend of him?
Yes.
Did he make you feel this way? Howard and Margaret both? Did they?
Yes.
We were very honored by them, yes. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, they had us as guests to their home
Both homes.
to swim in their swimming pool, and as guests to the Palisades where they had their home on the river. And
That's some of the biggest steaks.
oh, he cooked steaks outside on the fireplace.
That
and
is the ones that the dogs took and grabbed around.
they were huge. And one of the most wonderful things we had were rosin potatoes. Potatoes were wrapped in a newspaper and twisted on each end, and put in a big iron pot full of hot rosin, and you put the potatoes in there, and when the potatoes, no, I beg your pardon, the potatoes were put in without the paper, and when the potatoes were put in and were done, they floated to the top. Then he would take a potato out and wrap it up in the newspaper, twist it. They were so good, they were
You
just,
could cut it in half and
cut it in
eat it
half.
like you'd eat a ice cream cone or something.
and they were so fluffy, so good, and I'd never seen anything like that before.
Did you, I imagine you got invited to partake in some of their social life at Bruce Moore, Christmas parties or such?
No,
No.
not necessarily. Most of our relationship with them was on a personal basis, and they'd invite us over, and we'd have in the winter time when the Halls went to Florida, Mr. Hall would come back every other month, a month here, a month there, a month there. And during one of these spells when Mrs. Hall was in Florida, well, we'd have Mr. Hall over for dinner, and of course Marie was quite a deal, naturally. And he would have us over there when Mrs. Hall was home, things like this. I think the greatest compliment he paid us was when our daughter got married. They had an old-fashioned reception. Oh, no, that's not right. A wedding
Party.
Wedding party for the wedding group, I should say.
For the wedding group, for the bridesmaids, the grooms, the bride and groom.
Swimming party with it, and all the formal tea and things like this.
It was wonderful.
Oh, in fact, we were the only executive of the company that he ever went to a wedding of their children like that. And he told me, he said, "You're going to hate me from this, but I don't care."
How old would Margaret and Howard have been at this time?
How old were they?
You were in your 30s, early 30s.
50s?
I imagine, yes.
50s. Fabulous people.
That was kind of unusual for them to take a strong liking to two employees and
Yes.
truly enjoy each other's company so
Yeah.
much that
We felt very honored.
Oh, we sure did.
Mr. Hall was a small man in stature, but a big man inside, and he never knew a stranger.
And he was interesting. Kind of things they used to do. I'd take Mr. Hall out. He was on a lot of different boards, like in Detroit. Fruhoff Trailer Company was on that board in Chicago, Oklahoma City, various places around the country. And we'd go to these boards. And what he liked to do was go there the afternoon before the board meeting, which would be tomorrow morning. And particularly in the summertime, he liked to go there and they go out around the hotel swimming pool and sit there in the sun. He loved to do that. And he always insisted that I join him there. And we sat in a chair. And I was very fortunate in that he used me as a sounding board. He talked about things about his other employees, about business policy, things like this. He used me as a sounding board. And so I got to know him and his inner thoughts real well. And he never expected me to give him an answer or anything, but you know how you do. You feel better if you talk to somebody.
you listened to
I
him.
listen. And then he'd go to the board meeting the next morning, and we'd come home in the afternoon, and he'd say, "All right, did you behave yourself last night? Can I tell Maria a good report on you, or did you get in a little trouble last night?" He'd always kid me like that. Well, this leads up to one day over at the company. I was out with some people, some customers, and as I come into the office, our receptionist spoke to me and says, "Mr. Hall wants to see you right now." Yes, sir. Now what have I done? So I excused myself, went upstairs to his office, and his office was arranged such that you could walk in and stand in the doorway and see him, but you could not see this corner of the office if there was somebody there or not. Same way in the other direction. Well, I come up through the door, and it was always open. I rapped on the edge of it. He looked at me kind of quizzical like, and I said, "You want to see me, sir?" "Yes, sir." I've always asked you about your conduct on these meetings when you got overnight, and I just don't know. And you kind of took off at me a little bit, and then I could see a little smile in the corner of your mouth. And I took a step forward, looked around the corner, and here she was sitting there in the chair. And they both bust out laughing. So, we never forget that one.
Can you tell us some of the important people that people in this locale would recognize their names that you may have were friends of Howard's, or you may have flown around, or
Trying to think of the president of Merchant National Bank. Oh boy, I'm getting old and forgetting.
Hamilton?
Hamilton was, and then his father before him, and I can't remember his first name. There were several Hamiltons there, and then there was who was the guy's wife who's dying of cancer.
Yes.
George Forstner
Yes.
from the Amanas. Did
Yes,
you?
we know George very well. In fact, I had a lot to do with George Forstner through Mr. Hall. Well, through Mr. Hall, we got to know, shall I say, most of the important people in Cedar Rapids because of his association and him asking me to do things for them. We flew an awful lot of mercy trips. By mercy trips, I mean people that had been hurt in car accidents. I'd go get them, bring them back. I'd take people somewhere to a hospital, like we took the gentleman over to London, Ontario for cancer, which ended up being that Mr. Hall started Mercy Medical Center down, not Mercy Medical Center, but the radiation center at Mercy Medical Center. I don't know if you remember, but shortly after I started for him, there was a doctor and a fellow that owned a big shoe store here in town, and a couple other gentlemen were killed up in Minnesota in an airplane crash. And they were missing for a couple of days. And they finally found the crashed airplane. Of course, they were all dead. And he volunteered to go up and get them, which was fine. Please do it. Took the 4 seats out of the airplane. And at that time, I had a mechanic who was fly with me once in a while, and also took my uncle and left 1 seat in for him, because we figured these 4 bodies would be in body bags, you know, and just lay them on the floor, you know. The only thing is, these bodies had been out in the sun for about 3 days, and so we went to this small field where they had been brought, and the odor was unbelievable. So I remember putting the bodies in the airplane, and I told my 2 people to walk up the inner runway. They didn't want to put up with this. And I taxi the airplane up there, and they get aboard, and they come up, and the 3 of us sitting in the cockpit with the door closed here. So I tried to cut that order down on bring them home. But this is sort of trips we do a lot for Mr. Hall.
Yeah. Do you have a picture of your plane, or Howard's plane?
First one I flew plane. Somewhere. I don't know if you see this or not. This says on the side of it, Iowa Manufacturing Company. Now, it wasn't too long after that we decided that we'd take the name Iowa Manufacturing off of it, because we did not want our competitors to know that we were in town on a deal like that. So we took the name off of it.
Was this at Hunter?
This is at the old Hunter Airport. The picture is actually taken from the hangar. That's, where the cameraman's standing on. That'd be over here, I guess. And took the name off of it, took the shield off of it. And then we changed the number. Roy Fruhoff had some airplanes, and he had a connection with CAA at that time, which is now FAA. And he wanted to know if we didn't want a different number. And I said, I guess so. So we got N1250. And that was the airplane. number we had all during all the airplanes that we had.
Why did he want to not have the name on the plane when he went to another community?
Well, if we take a lot of our salesmen, say we had a customer in Oklahoma City, going down to see them to sell them some equipment. We didn't want our competitors to know that we were down there seeing the customer, so that nobody would know whose airplane we were doing. And of course, private aircraft like this in those days weren't nearly as prolific as they are now.
How many planes did you go through in working for Howard? This wasn't the only plane you flew in all the years you worked for Howard.
This was the D model, Beech D, Clinton D model. Went through the D, the E, and then a King Air B model, King Air. I think it's just the C model, King Air.
You were telling about Howard wanting you to buy a new plane.
Yeah. The airplane after this one, I have a picture of it somewhere. We got it back home, and we were in a big hangar down there owned by this time by Jim Watson, and the hangar was clogged with airplanes, and pulling them in and out, you'd had a wingtip on something or something like this, or people were all the time milling around it, and I did not like this one iota. And Mr. Hall called me and says, I'd like for you to buy me a new airplane. I said, Mr. Hall, we'll gain absolutely nothing. The airplanes are basically the same. Only thing you're going to do is just move the manufacturing date up, and we'll be throwing our money away. Well, this conversation went on several times over maybe a year or a year and a half. In the meantime, I had said, well, I would much rather spend the money on a hangar. So I said, this went on for about a year and a half. One day he called me and he said, I want you to buy me a new airplane. And I went through the same thing again. He says, I'll buy you a new hangar, you buy me a new airplane. Okay. So the hangar's still out there at Municipal. And well, I went and got him a new airplane. And got me a hangar. It's a real thing. It's interesting, the airplane I bought next was a King Air. He was in Florida. I was here. And Joe Lofek more or less run the company when Mr. Hall wasn't here. And he said, I want a new airplane. And I told him that about how much it would cost, something like this. Okay. So I go down to Beechcraft to look at the airplane. Joe Lofek's in Cedar Rapids. Howard Hall's in Miami, Florida. And I'm talking to Joe. And now I'm talking $200,000 for a piece of equipment or radio equipment and things like this. Well, Mr. Hall wanted an radio back in the cabin. One of these Seek radios that come out in those days. Excuse me, in a Cadillac where you push the button and it goes and picks up a station. He liked this radio back there. And I was on a piece of navigation equipment, as I say, $200,000 for a piece of radio. I come to the place where we had to make up our minds to do it. So Joe calls Howard, Mr. Hall in Miami, and here we have this three-way conversation going. And Howard says, I don't care what you spend, just get me a radio in the back end so that I can have something to listen to. Yes, sir. But we spent I think $2 million, something like that.
Did you ever progress to the point where you had a co-pilot, or did you fly all of?
Yeah, this all sounds very like we're very close, but to start out with, there was quite I was very restricted to start out when I first started flying for him, because he had heard stories of the flying show operation, where their management used to use their airplane that might say take a letter to Chicago to mail it. That's what you want to do. And he used to keep telling me, he said, we don't fly mail to Chicago to mail it when I get put on there. And the airplane here that shows you wasn't flowing very much. And so when I got it, in fact, I used to see it sitting in the old hangar, oil dripping down on the tires, and just wasn't maintained. Hunter and Jim Watson did not take care of it. And this concerned me very much. It's in particular when I started to fly on it, now I'm concerned about how this thing's been maintained. And I used to tell Mr. Hall, we ought to fly that airplane more. Oh, it's all right, it's all right, it's all right. This went on for, almost a year, where I was, every time I flew it, I was waiting for something to happen. Finally, we got enough time on it in about 2.5 years to where I had to have an engine overhaul on it. The time I put on it was, and so we decided to take it up to Rochester, Minnesota. Not to the Mayo Clinic, but to Gopher Aviation up there, which is noted for an engine overhaul. Well, when they took the engine apart, they found a lot of rusted bearings inside of it, on push rods and things like this. So, which more or less proved my point. So I got the president of Gopher Aviation plus the guy in charge of the shop to come to Cedar Rapids and bring these parts. And I made a point with Mr. Hall. We went in and we showed him, here's what the inside your engine looked like because of the fact that it was not flowing enough. And this is the obvious thing is you should see the things on the landing gear, the mechanism, the move and stuff like this. You can't lubricate them unless you work them. He went along with it kind of reluctantly, but we started flying a lot more at that time, and it got to be where after several years I could go in and say, Mr. Hall, I need to go out and fly everything. Okay, go ahead. And then after about 10 or 11, 12, 15 years, he'd call me and say, we want to use your airplane. Can we do that? But it went from a very restricted operation to the fact it was now my airplane. But that's sort of the man he was.
Did you find it hard? You were given a office job, but after you become very active in flying, didn't you find it hard to relate to your job at your desk?
No.
In keeping your flying separate from it?
No, I never did. The understanding was they gave me a job like in material control. I could leave that job any time I pleased. From there I went to an engineering department and I forget what I did there, but then I got to make quotations for equipment, asphalt. In fact, I made all the quotations for all asphalt equipment we sold for several years. And so I had to go on a trip. I'd drop it where I was, and it'd be right there, not move. When I got back, I couldn't go on.
Was George Forstner and Howard all good friends?
Got to be that way. They were to start out with. I don't know if you know the history of man refrigeration or not, about how it started.
No.
Well, real quickly. George Forstner had invented this refrigeration system which was used during the war. And then he started man refrigeration along with, there were 5 people, Mr. Hall, George Forstner, and then one gentleman from California, and I'm sorry, I can't tell you others. And Mr. Forstner was made, I think, president of the company, and Mr. Hall was some official of the company. And I remember when Mr. Forstner first come to see Mr. Hall, Mr. Forstner was very, yes sir, Mr. Hall, yes sir, very, shall I say, Mr. Forstner with all kindness, he was very much of a country boy, and just, whatever you say, Mr. Hall, we'd sure like to have your, and involved in this and things like that. And then it got to be a place after several years. He'd say, "Now, Howard, this is what you ought to do." But you know how friendships will develop and they get to talk to each other. But it was interesting in the way Mr. Forstner got involved in aviation. One day Mr. Hall called me and says, "Howard, George called me and wants to talk to you." And I said, "Go on down and talk, see what he wants." Okay. So I drive down there and go in Mr. Forstner's office and so forth. And he says, incidentally, Mr. Forstner had flown with us on several occasions. And by this time I had had a co-pilot and so forth. And, he said, "I want to buy an airplane. And I want you to tell me what to get." I said, "Well, Mr. Forstner, you want an airplane big enough that you can walk around in? So you can go get yourself a cup of coffee? Or you want an airplane, you get in, you sit there, and you got to sit there until you get where you're going?" "Oh, I want to be able to move around." I don't know if you know Mr. Forstner. And, oh, okay. So I said, "Well, I recommend so-and-so." "Well, how much that be?" And I said, "Oh, 900,000, something like that. It's a twin-engine Beechcraft known as a Queen Air." "Yeah, that's fine." He says, "Okay." I said, "What are you going to do for a pilot?" "Oh, we'll get that after we get the airplane." I said, "No, Mr. Forstner, you don't do that." I said, "How would you like it if you were come in here and shown an office, and there you are, and there's where you're going to work, and there's your equipment, and that's where you're going to work at?" I said, "If you're going to work in an office, you want to be able to arrange it the way you want it, to your convenience, the way you want it. Who you got in mind?" I said, "Boy, you've flown with him." I said, "He was my former co-pilot and now works for down in Centerville, Iowa for the Iowa Southern Utilities. A fellow by the name of Pete Warning. I think he's a relation of mine." I said, "Well, when can I talk to him?" I said, "Well, I'll give him a call and see if he comes here." So I called Pete that day. He said, "I want to be in town on Saturday, or Friday, I forget which it was." And he said, "I can see him then." Okay. So I called Mr. Forstner back and I said, "Pete can be here on Friday evening, and fine, meet me over at Howard's." Of course, Mr. Hall knew all about this. So anyway, Pete gets in town. We get together. We go over to Bruce Moore, and we're showing in. And here's the Hall and Forstner, Mr. and Mrs. both, in the sitting room. And we're showing in to the library, which is across the hall. And we sat there for 2 or 3 minutes. And in comes George, and in comes Mr. Hall. "Hi." And the two of them, Mr. Hall and Mr. Forstner, are talking business about something. And we're sitting there. They keep on talking. Finally, George turns over pieces. "You want to go to work for me?" "Yes, sir." "When can you start?" "I ought to give him 2 weeks' notice." "Okay, see you in 2 weeks." And that was the end of the hang. Pete and I walked out there, and Pete says, "How much am I making?" I said, "I don't know." That's where George Forstner got in the aviation business.
Howard, in all your years of flying experience, how many hours do you suppose you had logged?
Over 22,000 hours.
22,000 hours. Is that, I'm not an aviator, is that quite a bit?
Yes, it is. Now, the average airline pilot spends most of his flying time is 30 to 40,000 hours. But the average day in and day out civilian pilot flies his own airplane or rental airplane will get 3, 4, 5,000 hours, maybe maximum 10,000. The average military pilot military. Now the average are exceptions. We'll get $3,000 to $6,000. So yes, $22,000.
I ask this question of every aviator that's flown logged quite a few miles. In all of those hours that you logged, did you ever see a UFO
No,
or anything?
never
Never
did.
did. Nobody else has either. Marie, can you relate to some of the warm experiences you had spent with Howard and Margaret Hall?
Well, yes. I remember when we flew to Marathon, where their home was, they always packed a lunch in the airplane. And so we ate this lunch on the way down. And it was really good. We all enjoyed eating this lunch. And then when we were at Marathon, Mrs. Hall was very, very talkative and very communicative with us. And I can remember saying about when the newspaper boy to get his money for the newspaper, I never had any money or any change for him. And Mrs. Hall piped up and said, well, I don't either. And I had all I could do to keep from laughing. She had Bob's co-pilot's wife and me over for tea one afternoon. And it was like you see in the movies. The tea cart was wheeled in, and there was the china and the lemon and the scones and the little tea cakes, and she served it just like in the movies. It was fantastic. I can remember one time when the kids were little, we got a new ice cream freezer, and that was a treat to freeze ice cream. And we brought the freezer over to the halls so they could have some homemade ice cream. And they really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's in there.
Yeah, they did.
You should tell them about you watching Mr. Hall and reaching.
Oh, yes. When we were visiting them at Marathon, they would take us out to dinner. And I used to worry because when he went to pay for it, he'd put his hand in one pocket and draw out a wad of bills. Then he'd put it back, and then he'd take another pocket and draw out a wad of bills. And I kept looking on the ground to see if he dropped any. But that's the way he carried his money.
Marie, I have a feeling that you had a love of flying of your own.
I loved it. I loved it. Everybody in the family were pilots. My husband, my son, my daughter. So one day when my daughter said to me, Mom, why don't you learn to fly? And I thought, well, why not? I've been busy keeping him flying, and I've been busy keeping everybody. Why don't I do it? I don't have any responsibilities now. So I did.
How old were you at this time?
I started out, I got my pilot's license when I was 69. So I think I was 67 when I started.
Do you have, I see you have some photographs laying there on the table. Would you like to hold them up for the camera?
Well, this is a picture of me checking the oil, the dipstick. I had just received my pilot's license, and this was taken by the newspaper. Then I have another picture where I'm flying and over the country, and I loved it very much.
Did your husband allow you to have your own plane?
No, I rented a plane for my daughter. But I will tell you this, my husband did not help me.
No.
Probably just as well.
Oh,
Well, the one
Kind of
time,
like learning how to drive a car.
the one time I asked him a question, a simple question. He went into great detail, and that wasn't at all what I wanted to know. I just wanted to know a simple answer, and it confused me. So from then on, he never helped me one bit, and I never asked him. I did it all on my own.
When was the last time you flew, Marie?
I'm trying to think. probably the late 1980s, because I had surgery for an artificial hip.
Bob, were you proud of Marie
No.
doing this, or did you just assume that it was something everybody ought to do?
No. When you consider her.
Did you ever give her praise?
Yes, I did.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember when I first soloed,
I was out there and watched her.
it was 5 above zeros in the winter. It was about 4 inches of snow on the ground. It was cold. And there he was watching me. I got out of the plane. I wasn't at all cold. I was
No,
hot.
she had her coat off. She was hot. Oh, no, I'm very proud of her.
Bob, did you ever own an airplane of your own?
Yes, we did. We owned a surplus AT-6, which was an advanced trainer for the military. In fact, over Mr. Hall's airplane, here's one that we own right back there. We owned it for
Over a year.
a couple
And that
of
was the airplane he flew. The first year he was home. He
Oh.
flew all over the United
That's good.
States.
Well, we could go on and on and on with this interview. It's been very, very interesting. And I'm sure that your family is going to enjoy this for years and years. And the History Center wants to thank you both very much for sharing your memories. I realize some of them were quite unpleasant for you, but thank you very much for sharing your memories with us. And then again, thank you from the Linn County Historical Society.
You're welcome.
Certainly welcome.